October 218 BC. Elephants, horses, and thousands of men crawl over the frozen Alps. Every mile costs lives, but each step blindsides Rome. At the front rides Hannibal. His homeland Carthage is at war with Rome, and he's bringing the fight to their doorstep. What kind of general picks the hardest road to outsmart his enemy, and will Rome be ready? 20 years before that freezing crossing, the two republics had already measured each other across the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War had left Rome in possession of Sicily and a navy it once lacked. Carthage, still strong but shaken, turned to silver-rich Iberia, present-day Spain, to rebuild wealth and armies beyond Roman reach. Hannibal Barca, Hannibal's father, fought for this revival in his Iberian campaigns. According to legend, the father asked his son to swear he will forever be an enemy of Rome. Years later, in 221 BC, military command passed to Hannibal, who followed his commitment to the Carthaginian cause, doubled by a personal vendetta against Rome. The Romans, meanwhile, expanded across northern Italy and used the Alps as a defensive wall. Its strength came from disciplined legions, citizen soldiers under elected consuls. By treaty, Rome imposed limits on Carthaginian expansion in Iberia, using the Ebro River as a natural boundary. Carthage was not allowed to expand beyond it to the north. Yet the pro-Roman city of Saguntum, much farther to the south, drew Hannibal's attention. As he made preparations for a new confrontation with his arch-enemy, he couldn't tolerate having a port city loyal to Rome so deep in his sphere of influence. After an 8-month brutal siege, Hannibal captured and sacked Saguntum, while Rome seemed to look the other way. When Roman envoys eventually showed up, they demanded Hannibal's surrender. The Carthaginian Senate refused to hand him over. Soon after, the Roman Senate declared war, plunging the Mediterranean into another 17 years of bloodshed. The decision found Hannibal eager and ready to carry the fight into Italy itself, before Rome could bring it to Africa or Iberia. In the spring of 218 BC, he set out from Iberia with 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. He would soon test every theory of war, every limit of endurance, and every assumption Rome held about its safety. Before departing, Hannibal appointed his brother Hasdrubal to defend Iberia. He also sent envoys to negotiate safe passing with the Gauls, but many tribes remained hostile. Over the summer, his army shrank as he advanced, mostly to leaving garrisons, but also to attrition, desertion, and skirmishes with hostile tribes. By early autumn, Hannibal reached the Rhone in present-day southern France, where he met aggressive Gauls massing on the opposite bank. To cross the river, he improvised. He sent a detachment upriver to build rafts overnight, then attacked from the rear at dawn. The Gauls broke in confusion, and the elephants crossed. Within days, his army stood on the far side, ready to march on. Meanwhile, Rome deployed fleets for Iberia and Sicily, under consuls Cornelius Scipio and Sempronius Longus. Scipio landed his army at Massalia, expecting to meet Hannibal in Gaul, but he was too late to intercept him, then dispatched his forces toward Spain under his brother Gnaeus and sailed back to Italy to block the incoming invasion. At this point, Hannibal was already tackling his biggest challenge yet: crossing the Alps. The Alpine approach offered no single highway, only high passes known to local guides whose loyalties shifted by bribe or fear. Some tribes pretended friendship, then struck from the cliffs when the column narrowed. Supplies dwindled, and frost took more lives than unfriendly tribes did. The crossing had taken more than 2 weeks and crippled Hannibal's army. Sources estimate he lost a third of his men and horses by the time he reached the Po River on the other side. Remarkably, some elephants survived, together with roughly 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. For those who made it, the Alps were their first battle, and survival their first victory. In the Po Valley, Hannibal's arrival gave local Gallic tribes once loyal to Rome a good reason to rebel. They offered him food and recruits, thus replenishing his army. His march over the Alps gave Hannibal the initiative. Against all odds, he had brought Carthage to Italy's doorstep and moved the war on Rome's own soil. Meanwhile, as Hannibal reorganized, Rome moved to meet him. Consul Cornelius Scipio drew up near the Ticinus River with a strong cavalry screen and light infantry supports. He needed a probe, not a battle, but Hannibal offered both. The clash at Ticinus began as a reconnaissance in force. Hannibal led forward his Numidian, Iberian and Gallic mounted warriors. In the swirl of charges and dust, Numidian cavalry hooked around the Roman rear, pelting them and sowing panic. Scipio was unhorsed and badly injured. His teenage son, later known as Scipio Africanus, reportedly pulled him out through the melee. The Romans broke. Hannibal held the field with minimal infantry engaged, and the lesson was stark. Carthage's cavalry set the terms. Scipio fell back across the Po to recover. Rome's second consul, Sempronius Longus, moved north from Sicily to join him. Winter pressed in, and political currents in Rome demanded action. Sempronius, eager for glory, argued for a decisive engagement before Hannibal could peel away more Gallic allies. The next confrontation took place at Trebia River, where around 40,000 men on each side prepared to engage in battle. Hannibal chose the ground. The night before, he placed his younger brother, Mago, with a small force in a brushy hollow near the Roman flank. Before dawn, he sent light troops to needle the Roman camp and then pulled them back across the icy water. Sempronius, thinking the enemy in retreat, ordered his men to form ranks and engage. Cold water soaked their tunics, their fingers numbed around shield grips and swords. As the Romans deployed on soggy ground, fatigued and half-frozen, Hannibal's cavalry slammed into Sempronius's army and then rolled up the sides. The Roman center pushed hard and nearly split the Carthaginian middle, but at the crisis, Mago's hidden detachment burst from the hollow into the Romans' rear. The trap closed. Panic spread as thousands fled back toward the river, drowning or cut down at the crossings. Only a quarter of the Roman troops managed to safely retreat. The consequences rippled across Italy. Gallic support for Hannibal deepened. The Romans still had manpower, money, and allies, but the Carthaginian general now dictated pace and place. By early 217 BC, Hannibal moved south through the Apennine Mountains. Floods near the Arno River turned dirt roads to swamp. His remaining elephants perished at the marshes of Arno after a freezing storm. Still, the army pressed on. In June, the Romans regrouped under consul Gaius Flaminius near Lake Trasimene for a third chance to intercept. The Roman army, 25,000 strong, was outnumbered 2-1. Flaminius was eager to strike, but Hannibal read his impatience and marched past them, burning villages to provoke pursuit. Flaminius took the bait. At dawn on June 21st, he followed along the lake's narrow northern shore. Hannibal had already hidden troops on the slopes, with cavalry sealing the exits. When the Roman vanguard touched Hannibal's rearguard, the trap closed before Flaminius could deploy. Within 3 hours, this Roman army ceased to exist as a fighting force. Flaminius fell near the shore. Thousands drowned, pressed backward into the water. Days later, a separate Roman cavalry column under Gaius Centenius was surrounded and cut down, compounding the shock. Rome reeled. After Ticinus and Trebia, now Trasimene, 3 defeats within a year. The Senate declared a national emergency and appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus dictator, granting him full authority to save the Republic. Fabius studied what others called disaster. Hannibal's edge lay in decisive field battles and superior cavalry. Rome's lay in manpower, logistics, and time. His plan was blunt. Deny Hannibal a fight worth winning. He shadowed the Carthaginian army, cut off foragers, burned grain, harried supply lines, and refused open battle on chosen ground. The strategy worked, but it grated on Roman nerves. When Hannibal raided Campania and slipped out, critics claimed Fabius feared combat. However, the truth was out for all to see. Rome called patience a strategy only after running out of alternatives. The war's rhythm had changed. Hannibal still roamed Italy, undefeated, but his opponent was now time and scarcity. By the summer of 216 BC, Rome grew tired of the Fabian strategy and rebuilt its largest army yet. 8 legions, over 80,000 men, under consuls Paulus and Varro. Hannibal encamped near Cannae in southern Italy. He fielded roughly 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. Libyans, Spaniards, Gauls, all veterans. At dawn on August 2nd, Varro, who despised Fabius's lack of military engagement, ordered a deep Roman push at the center. In response, Hannibal's center bowed back in controlled retreat. The Romans believed they were breaking it. Then the wings folded in. African heavy infantry positioned on the wings pivoted inward and struck the Roman flanks. On one side, Hasdrubal's cavalry routed the Roman mounted squadrons, then wheeled behind the infantry. Encirclement followed. The killing lasted for hours, and Consul Paulus fell. Less than a fifth of the Roman army managed to escape, Consul Varro among them. Cannae was one of the most catastrophic Roman defeats in history, by loss of manpower and consequences. When Varro returned to Rome, the Senate thanked him publicly for not despairing, signaling resolve over blame. Truth is, the Senate was desperate. They forbade mourning to steady nerves, banned ransoms for captured soldiers, recruited boys of 17 and even slaves. Allied defections surged. Capua, second only to Rome in wealth, parts of southern Italy and sections of Sicily aligned with Hannibal. Yet the city's core institutions held. In Rome's darkest day, Fabius's logic returned. Win not by one battle, but by outlasting the man who had just won the greatest of them. Even though everything went in his favor, Hannibal chose not to march on Rome. His army was exhausted, and Rome too large to siege efficiently. He aimed instead to pry loose more of Rome's coalition, after wintering at Capua to rest and recruit. From his new base, Hannibal ranged across the south, luring cities to his side. Rome started a reconquest campaign while avoiding set-piece battles. Meanwhile, Sicily tilted. Syracuse had long been Rome's ally under Hiero II, but his death in 215 BC brought his grandson Hieronymus, a youth seduced by Carthaginian promises. He was assassinated a year later, yet pro-Carthaginian factions persisted, so Rome responded with a siege under commander Marcellus. Syracuse's defense became legend. The renowned mathematician Archimedes devised engines to hurl stones, grappling cranes to overturn ships, and dazzling tricks that stalled assaults. Finally, in 212 BC, a Roman detachment exploited treachery and forced a night entry. Street fighting followed. Archimedes, absorbed in a geometry problem, was killed by a soldier despite Marcellus's orders to spare him. With Syracuse subdued, Rome secured Sicily's grain, easing strain on Italy's armies. Back in Italy, the noose tightened around Capua, besieged by 3 Roman armies. Hannibal tried to unhinge the siege by maneuver, raids, feints, and pressure on Roman supply lines. When the encirclement held, he marched north and camped within sight of Rome's walls in 211 BC, daring the Senate to recall the legions. They did not, and Capua surrendered. Rome executed its leaders, and the city lost municipal rights, an example to every watching ally. By 211 BC, Hannibal still roamed, undefeated in open battle, yet the coalition around him thinned. Rome's methods, patient sieges, targeted terror, and relentless levies, began to tell. Hannibal's victories had been tactical. Rome's answer, increasingly, was systemic. The Republic learned to bleed its enemy by inches, through attrition and the quiet arithmetic of manpower. You might be wondering why Hannibal was not receiving support or reinforcements from his home base in Iberia, or from Africa. Well, the Romans kept them busy. While Hannibal fought in Italy, a parallel war burned across Iberia. From 218 BC, Publius and Gnaeus Scipio pushed beyond the Ebro River to sever Carthaginian revenues and recruits. Their steady pressure tied down resources that might otherwise have reinforced Hannibal. Between 217 and 212 BC, the two Scipios won local successes, but lacked the strength to break south. They relied on Celtiberian levies bought with coin. In 211 BC, Carthaginian coordination sharpened. Both of the Roman armies broke, and their commanders fell. For a moment, Iberia swung back toward Carthage. Then the Senate appointed the young Publius Cornelius Scipio, the son who had once saved his now-dead father of the same name at the Battle of Ticinus years before. He arrived in Iberia in 210 BC and saw a map of divided Carthaginian armies and a single vulnerable nerve, their capital. In spring 209 BC, Scipio struck Cartago Nova. Guided by local fishermen, the Romans timed an assault to a low tide, wading the lagoon while a frontal naval diversion fixed the garrison. The walls fell in a day. He took this vital city like he'd pre-booked it. The capture yielded the treasury, arsenals, the fleet in harbor, and hostages from Iberian tribes. Scipio freed the hostages and treated prisoners with ceremony, converting captives into clients and allies. Power in Iberia shifted with a single stroke. With the coastal base secured, Scipio pressed inland and he defeated Hasdrubal Barca at Becula, then Hasdrubal Gisco and Mago Barca at Ilipa. Scipio's political and military methods secured Iberia and made it the Republic's future springboard to Africa. In 207 BC, after his defeat at Becula, Hasdrubal Barca left to join his brother Hannibal in Italy. He crossed the Alps by an easier route and moved down Italy's Adriatic side. Southbound couriers carried his letters to coordinate a junction with his brother, but were intercepted by Roman patrols. Consul Nero, who was following Hannibal's army around, left a thin screen of troops behind and dashed through the countryside to meet up with Consul Livius, who was intercepting Hasdrubal. Nero's troops sneaked into Livius' camp by night and hid his reinforcements. Hasdrubal didn't know what he was up against. Sensing a change at dawn, Hannibal's brother tried to avoid battle, but his columns got tangled on broken ground. The Romans coordinated well, and the Carthaginian line collapsed in stages. Hasdrubal died fighting, and the Romans informed Hannibal by flinging his brother's head into his camp. Consequences followed quickly. Gallic and Italic allies hedged or returned to Rome. Fresh levies and steady garrisons now reasserted pressure across southern Italy. At this point, Iberia was stabilized. Sicily's grain fed the legions, and Hannibal's position in Italy had no future without external help. In 205 BC, Hannibal's younger brother, Mago, sailed to Liguria with a modest force, but legions boxed him. By 204 BC, Rome was ready to carry the war across the sea. Scipio sailed with roughly 30,000 to Utica, aiming to finish the conflict on African soil. The Numidian kingdom formed the hinge. Its territory stretched across northern Africa, present-day Algeria, neighboring Carthage. Internal conflict over Numidia's rule found Carthage backing Syphax, who ruled over western Numidia, while the Romans backed his rival Massinissa. In 203 BC, Scipio burned Syphax's and Hasdrubal's twin encampments near Utica in a night attack, then beat their reformed forces at the Great Plains. Syphax was captured. Massinissa reclaimed his throne and brought fast, disciplined cavalry to Rome's side. Shocked, Carthage recalled Hannibal and Mago. Mago died at sea, wounded from earlier battle, while Hannibal returned to Carthage after 15 years of undefeated campaigning in Italy. The Roman Senate formulated a peace treaty, which Hannibal repudiated, and troops gathered around Zama for a final showdown. Hannibal fielded about 40,000 men with 80 elephants. Scipio had slightly fewer infantry, but held the edge in cavalry with Massinissa's support. At dawn, elephants charged. Scipio's maniples opened lanes and used very loud trumpets to panic the beasts. Hannibal's veterans steadied the center, but Massinissa enveloped after routing Carthage's cavalry and struck the rear as Scipio pressed the front. Zama was Cannae with roles in reverse. Hannibal escaped, but his army did not. The Battle of Zama taught him that history repeats, but not politely. Scipio's victory earned him the title Africanus, to honor his triumph in North Africa. He is one of the most celebrated Roman commanders in history. Carthage sued for peace. In 201 BC, Rome imposed terms that dissolved Carthaginian power. Surrender of warships, cession of Iberia, reparations in silver, elephants banned, and Carthage was not allowed to go to war anywhere without Roman consent. Massinissa emerged as king of a growing Numidia, Rome's indispensable partner. But the consequences reached far beyond Africa. Rome organized Iberia, which they called Hispania, under permanent provincial rule. With the west secured, Rome turned east, defeating Macedon and Seleucid power across the next decades. In Africa, Massinissa shaped the sequel. He pressed Carthage's borders for decades, absorbing borderlands and exploiting Roman favor. Carthage, legally shackled by the treaty, paid the indemnity early, hoping to reclaim autonomy. Then they raised troops without Roman permission to fight Massinissa. That was a treaty breach that furnished Rome its casus belli. The path to the Third Punic War lay open. Hannibal became a magistrate in the Carthaginian state. Years later, rival nobles instigated Romans to press his surrender, and he fled into exile. His time and cause of death are not known. Hannibal earned his place among the most renowned commanders in history. But while he kept his oath of eternal enmity towards Rome, the Romans kept everything else. They stopped losing the moment they stopped looking for shortcuts. Between Fabius's strategy of ghosting entire armies and Scipio's military and diplomatic skill, Rome managed to pull its weight. But that's not entirely how the Romans remembered it. For decades after, they lived with a kind of national anxiety. People would warn of new threats with one phrase, Hannibal ad portas, meaning Hannibal at the gates. It became shorthand for crisis, for the feeling that doom is not out there someday. It's here and now. That's the mark Hannibal left. One brilliant general from Carthage frightened Rome so deeply that his name turned into a permanent alarm signal. That's trauma weaponized into memory. Rome survived Hannibal, but can you survive one more history video at your gates? Like, subscribe, brace for another invasion, and watch these stories next. The Reel of Time never stops. See you next time.